Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger, and helping people scared of things for our Doomsday Debunk group on Facebook. And I'm just going to do another video on this. I think my last one was a little bit too quiet for some reason, so I'm going to talk anyway. This is first about what happened in Congress. And a short summary here is that, very simply, it's all over now. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are confirmed as the President and Vice President, and Pence declared the vote accurately, as you would expect, as someone who follows the Constitution like other people in the United States do, and all the politicians who have any basic understanding of US politics do follow the Constitution. And Trump asked him to do something that no politician should do in the United States, to go against the Constitution. This is basically because Trump does not understand the Constitution. He's a businessman, and all the way through he has shown very little understanding of how the US Constitution works, and he asked Pence to do something that no president should ever ask his vice president to do if they understood the US Constitution. That's basically what happened. And then he told the protesters when Pence was saying he's probably not going to do it, then Trump told his protesters to gather around the Capitol. And then Pence, then he did a letter in which he said very clearly that he's looked carefully at the US Constitution, and he does not, as Vice President, have the constitutional capability to declare a different result from the result that the Congress has just counted in the session that he presides over, which is reasonably sensible. You wouldn't expect him to have that power. How could that possibly work? That every 4 years the Congress comes, everybody votes, and then the electoral college does their electoral count, then it goes to Congress counts, they listen to any objections, and then at the end of it, if the Vice President wants to, he can just declare a different vote count from the end result of that whole process. That is obviously not going to be sensible. That is not democratic, and that is not in the US Constitution. He is not permitted to do that. And he looked very carefully at the Constitution, and he came to the firm conclusion that he can't do that. So that's basically what happened. And then Trump, because he didn't understand the US Constitution, he's always had a very shaky understanding of the US Constitution. He told all these protesters that Pence could do that, and they went off to Capitol Hill thinking that this was basically the Congress gathering to decide whether it was a fraudulent election, and that again shows a very hazy understanding of the Constitution. Trump has never seemed to understood the separation of powers, that the President is the executive branch only, that he thinks of the President perhaps as being a little bit like the CEO of a company, and it's a totally misleading analogy. The President can't act like that. So he was trying to do things that no President can do. Totally impossible for a President to do the things he's trying to do right now. And then the Congress is not the judicial branch. They can't rule on the rule of law. They can't make any opinion on whether the election was fraudulent or not. The legislative branch can't do those things. If you understood the most basic ideas of the US Constitution, the 3 branches of the US Constitution, that's what the judiciary branch should do. And there's absolutely no way that Congress could ever declare that the vote count was fraudulent, because it's not something they're even permitted to do. They're the wrong branch of the US Constitution to even venture an opinion on that as a legal process. They can't do that. And the United States is run by the rule of law. It is not run by allegations. It doesn't matter how many times you allege something, this does not become a legal fact. there's the legal process of evidence. And if you have a serious allegation, then you need to go through a legal process, produce the evidence, and then the evidence has to stand up to legal scrutiny. And Trump has never done that. So this allegation is groundless. If you believe in the rule of law, then Trump's allegation is groundless, because he has not been able to ground it in law and the legal process and the judiciary. And it's only the judiciary that can do that. And trying to get Congress to change what the judiciary have already decided in the long legal cases going up to the 14th of December, and then at the end of the 14th of December, there has to be an end point for the legal process. You can't have the election just goes on and on and on, and even 5 years later they try to overturn what happened. We could even be now trying to overturn the election result in 2016 and claim that Trump shouldn't have been in president at all. It just can't work like that. There has to be an end date, and the end date set down is the 14th of December, and that's why after the 14th of December, Mitch McConnell, who, like all the other legislators, and they are politicians, and unlike the president, who doesn't have to be a politician, the legislators do have to be politicians. They are elected, they've gone through the political process, they become elected by the normal process as a politician, and then they've been politicians, many of them, for the elder ones, for all their life, for much of their life, much of their professional life. And so, of course, they thoroughly understand the US Constitution, and Mitch McConnell knew that by the 15th of December that the legal process has ended. They can't go any further. So that's why he then congratulated Biden for his win on the 15th of December. And then when you get to the Congress, what happened yesterday in the Congress, then that is just, it's normally just a formality approving the votes that have already been voted by the electors on the 14th of December. Some of them were locked in on the 8th, because if there's a certain process by which you can lock it in and reach the end of all legal processes, if you do that, you can do it a few days earlier. So some of them had already were already immune for any legal challenges several days before the 14th. And Trump has never understood this. I mean, the other possibility is that he was just deliberately misleading his followers. I don't believe that. I think, even though it's an incredible thing to say about the President of the United States, that he has never managed to understand how the legal process works, and has never understood the separation of powers, and never understood the most basic things about the US Constitution. I think that's the kindest way to understand what Trump has been doing, and I think it's true myself. And so that's basically what happened. He was asking them to do something that's impossible. And the protesters, very not surprisingly, because many people in the United States, I've discovered, talking with them, don't understand the US Constitution very well either, because it's very complicated. It's very difficult to understand. And so, I think most people have a basic idea of the separation of powers, but some of these details, they've never done the spade work to find out how it all works, and they just accept whatever the most recent politician that talks to them says. And so, naturally enough, followers of Trump, who are very strong believers in the kind of Trump program, then when he tells them something, they think that's the way that the Congress works, and so they go rushing off to Congress, thinking of it as a kind of judiciary branch, but it isn't, and expecting Pence to be able to override everything without really thinking through what the implications would be if a vice president could override everything at the very last moment. And that's basically what happened. Now, so another thing I want to talk about. But it's all over now. So there were really astonishing scenes, which will be they're just indelibly marked in U.S. history, and centuries from now, I wouldn't be surprised if 500 years from now, this is one of the landmark moments that children at school would learn about U.S. history. I mean, it's just quite an extraordinary thing for the United States to have people. So now, first of all, I want to make it clear that the people who invaded the Capitol Some of them could be just naive people who went along and didn't really understand what was going on. But I think most people would stop and think twice before walking into the Capitol alongside people who are wearing Camp Auschwitz shirts and waving Confederate banners, which in the United States, the first one obviously means you're a neo-Nazi, and then waving a Confederate banner means that that you are a white supremacist and that you support the idea. It's basically saying that you're in a line with the slave owners who were the ones who had that flag in the US Civil War. And you think that white people are superior to other races. And so I don't think probably a lot of people who went into Congress, they may have just been sort of blinded by and not understood the significance of what they were doing, which was basically it's very symbolic in US politics. The Capitol itself it's like difficult to understand in the United Kingdom, but I think we're a bit like people wearing Camp Auschwitz shirts and waving a Nazi. The Confederate flag wouldn't mean much here, but waving something. I don't think we don't really have a symbol for slavery, but some kind of thing saying I'm in favour of slavery or something, and marching in to the Queen's bedroom in Buckingham Palace. Because for us in the United Kingdom, then we think of our system of government. We have an unwritten constitution, and we think of it as symbolically represented by the Queen. So for us, in the same way, in the United States, they don't have it symbolically represented by a Queen or a King. They have it symbolically represented by the Capitol and by the US Constitution. So it's utterly shocking for US legislators to see people marching in with these symbols of Nazism and so on, and setting up inside the Capitol. It'd be like doing that inside Buckingham Palace with the Queen resident there in her bedroom. That's really what it's like. And so it's no wonder that the US legislators were utterly shocked by this, and they said that Trump must, he absolutely had to, what's the word, he had to say something. He had to tell them that this is wrong, they shouldn't do that. And to this moment, Trump has not said that they've done anything wrong. He said, indeed, that he loved them for doing this, and he thought they'd done something great, basically. That's what he said in the video that the Twitter took down. And Twitter took it down not for any legal reason. Twitter took it down because they are a private company which has terms of service, and anyone who joins Twitter and gets a Twitter account, they sign up to those terms of service. And one of the terms of service involves not doing things like inciting violence, which is basically what he's doing by showing his approval of people who march into Congress wearing an Auschwitz shirt and saying nothing about it. I mean, that's basically, he probably doesn't quite understand. I think he's a bit hazy about, Trump is very hazy about the US Constitution. He may not fully understand the significance of the Capitol. That's also possible. It seems absolutely incredible that someone would be educated in the US education system and not understand this, but it is entirely possible, I think, that he doesn't understand the significance of the US, of the Capitol, or of the US Constitution for most Americans. That's the kindest way to understand what just happened. And so, and that's why they're actually talking about, there's quite a big movement there, that they're actually meeting to talk about the possibility of suspending his duties as a president, so he'll no longer have presidential powers. This is something they can do, and it's the 25th Amendment, and I think it's the 4th clause of the 25th Amendment, which is, you would know, it's never been used before, but it was put there just in case a president became of unsound mind. They couldn't think of any other situation where you'd need it, but there's no actually test for it. so you don't have to do any particular test to apply this amendment. But basically this is equivalent for many of the legislators to him just going doolally and being of totally unsound mind, because he's totally no understanding of the US Constitution. He's doing things that are absolutely extraordinary and totally impossible, and not. And this is why it'll be in history books for 500 years, I would think. And this president who actually acted against the US Constitution in a very blatant, open way, and then never said he'd done anything wrong. And that's never happened before. Never in the whole of US history has any president shown such blatant disregard of the US Constitution. And that's why they're so appalled by it, and that's why they are considering just suspending his duties as president. Now, the way they would do it, it's a very big thing to do, so they may well not do it. And indeed, I think probably they won't do it, but it's something they have as a reserve. If they think it would really be, if they thought there was a possibility of him doing something like this again in the next 12 days, then I think if they thought he could do that, he might do something like this, something as directly against the US Constitution sometime in the next few days, then I think they would feel they have no choice but to deprive him of his presidential duties. And they can do that. So the way they can do it, to actually go through the entire process would require 2/3 majority in both houses. But they don't actually have to do that, and then Pence to sign it. But they don't have to actually do that, because the process of the 25th Amendment involves, is started by just a group. You just need 13 people to vote for that. So there's the 12 people, and then there's Pence, out of a committee of 23. And so these people, they have been meeting. They met yesterday. I'm not sure if they're meeting again today. And they have been meeting to discuss whether they're going to do this. So if they do this, then it's really, he could be removed from office temporarily, suspended from office today. They would just need to just make the decision, then they go to Congress and say, we are starting this process. At that very moment, Trump is no longer president, and Pence, as a vice president, presides over the process, because it's meant for a situation where a president is potentially of unsound mind. And so this is something you have to be able to deal with urgently. And so during the process of whether they're deliberating whether he has unsound mind, or whether there's some other reason why he has to be immediately removed from office, then the vice president is in charge instead of the president of the entire country, of everything. He's an acting president. And then this process continues for 21 days. So even though they wouldn't expect to achieve the 2/3 majority, it'd be quite hard to convince that many Republican senators to actually support removing the president. They can start the process, and then just the clock runs out, and then when it gets to Biden's inauguration, then at that point, then they don't take it any further. So he wouldn't be technically actually removed using the 4th clause, or whichever clause it is, of the 25th Amendment, but they would start the process, and then just the clock would run out. So it's a bit like gerrymandering or something. It's a procedural method that they can use, and they can use that at any moment. So if they do feel that Trump is seriously unhinged at any point, and not necessarily mentally doolally, but just, he has total no understanding of his presidential duties, and no understanding of how the Constitution works, and he has to be removed because he's inciting something that no president should ever do. If they think this is going to happen again, indeed, if they knew this was going to happen, say the day before yesterday, then that could have been, except the Congress couldn't meet before then, so they wouldn't have had the possibility. But if they knew something like this was going to happen the next day, what just did happen, then I think they would have invoked this to stop it. So so we'll just see what happens. So it's a case. So if any of you are worried about this, about Trump doing more stuff like this, then don't worry, because if they do come to the conclusion that he might, then they can stop it pretty much instantly. So I don't think they are going to do it. We'll see what happens. I'm not the one making a decision. They'll be evaluating it, and they will be thinking, do we need to do this very extreme process of basically suspending his duties as president because we consider him not to be capable? And it would involve Pence needing to say that as well. So it would be a very major thing to say, because Pence has already made a very major division with Trump, and he's totally condemned the protest. He didn't actually directly name Trump, but it's implicitly included that this wasn't right for Trump to do that, obviously. And Mitch McConnell and they're all and so anyway, that's the worst case. I think it's just going to simmer away though, and because Trump does say there will be an orderly transition to Biden. So although he goes on with making his legally false claims that the election's been stolen, that has never been established and America is governed by the rule of law. So that's sort of explained much of this, of what actually happened. So Mike Pence condemned the violence, and so did Mitch McConnell, and Kelly Loeffler. She rescinded her objection to the Georgia account, but the other senators didn't. So the objections went ahead, but none of them were upheld. And so, that's what Trump said. We have to have peace, so go home. We love you. You're very special. I mean, he's saying that to these people, to neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and who've just been invading the capital. And that is why this video was taken down. So, because that was just so over the top. And they have a special exemption on Twitter that leaders of countries, the world leaders, can say things that nobody else on Twitter can say without getting their account immediately blocked. But this exemption will end on the 20th of January. So after that, then Trump will be much less of a force in US politics. Obviously, all ex-presidents are. So he will still have his base. I'm sure it's hugely narrowed by now, because for many Republicans he has gone a step too far. Certainly for an awful lot of the senators and the people in the House, it's just a step too far, and they're just not going to follow him anymore. And it's become to the point where it would be politically unacceptable and pretty much political dynamite to say that you support Trump. If that means, if he's not going to back down on this, if that means you're supporting, if it indirectly means you're supporting storming the Capitol Hill, they have to distance themselves from that event. They can't associate themselves in any way with what happened yesterday if they want to continue as a politician, for most people, then, because that's associating themselves with breaking the Constitution and having no respect for the US Constitution. And there's no way they can do that. It's a bit like a politician in the United Kingdom saying that they are behind, that they approve of what I was saying, neo-Nazis storming the Queen's bedroom, and that would be the end of your career as a politician in the United Kingdom. It's very much like that in the United States. So because in the United Kingdom, because of the symbolic nature of the Queen for our politics. So yeah, and I was just going to say, some people are saying that these are all people, these are all Antifa protesters pretending to be Trump protesters. There's no way that an Antifa would carry a white supremacist flag, and no way at all that they would wear a Camp Auschwitz shirt. Just no way. But further than that, these are actually they're gradually putting names to these people, because obviously they're all recognisable faces, and some of them are well known in white supremacists, and others who are less well known, but there will be people who know them, and so they're gradually putting names to all these people, and eventually they are going to be, there's no doubt, it's going to be a legal process, because and many of them will receive judicial sentences of some sort for what they've done, because it's deeply illegal to do that in the United States, and especially for the Capitol, they're not going to get much leniency doing something like this, but it goes before the courts, and the justice has to decide what the sentence is for storming the Capitol and carrying a Confederate flag through. So this chap will probably end up in jail, I would imagine, for doing what he did. But we'll see what happens. So it really is a very serious thing they did, and they may not. Some people. I mean, I would imagine that they would be focusing mainly on the most extreme cases of what they did. Oh yes, and one of them is actually carrying. No, that's not actually in the Capitol. But but I just want to make very, very clear that these people are not. They are not the ordinary. I had a section, I've gone lost it now. Oh, no, I said they're not. These are not representative Trump supporters. And this was the bit about Trump's social media accounts are blocked. And hopefully you now understand why they blocked his social media accounts. And blocked for 24 hours Facebook and Instagram, blocked temporarily from Twitter for 12 hours. But if he doesn't delete this video, then I just think that I've just done a little bit of transcript. I've actually got the full transcript there, and you might think I could get in trouble with YouTube for including it, but for uploading this and with a full transcript, because YouTube have taken it down. But YouTube have explained very carefully that it's okay to mention the video if you have it in the right context. So I'm explaining the context here very clearly. So I think I'm covered by having the text there in this video, because I explained comparing what Trump said with what Pence said. And there's the full transcript of what Trump said. So I'll just leave up there for a second. If you want to read it, you can pause there and see. And then here's the full transcript of what Pence said. And Pence said what you'd expect to say. We condemn the violence that took place here in the strongest possible terms. And for Trump to not say that, to say anything else except that, is just incredible, that the president wouldn't say that. And we grieve the loss of life in his hallowed halls. He hasn't even said anything about sympathy to the people who died. So 3 who fell, who died probably from things like falling off the scaffolding on the outside of the Capitol when they were trying to get in, and one lady who was killed in a standoff. They had guns, these protesters, and to go into the Capitol with guns is again an absolutely incredible thing. It's like going to the Queen's bedroom with guns, and then naturally, of course, so the police were extremely professional. There weren't enough police, and that'll be a huge scandal. That's a huge scandal too. That's going to be investigated. And the reason there weren't enough police is mainly because Trump didn't authorise the extra police that were needed to protect the Capitol from the protesters. So they only had the normal, very small number of police. And when the protesters started going to the Capitol, and Trump didn't authorise the extra police that were needed, the National Guard that were needed, then Pence then authorised it, but the ones that he authorised took a while to get there, because Pence only authorised them later on. I assume they'll probably find out as they go through and find out what happened. I presume that Pence discovered rather late in the game that Trump hadn't authorised extra protection, and then he took over and did it himself. And then later on, a whole lot of them came up, and then they looked after the Capitol properly. Anyway, for whatever the reason, there were nowhere near enough police to guard the Capitol with such a large crowd, and that's how they managed to get in. And the police were very, very professional. Do I have any pictures of them guarding? I'm not sure if I do, but maybe I should. No, I don't have any pictures of the police guarding. I have a section where I talk about it, but I can just talk about it here. So the police, when they stormed into the Capitol Hill, then the police knew they didn't have enough to stop them peacefully. So in that situation, they did what they would have been trained to do, which is to not confront them. Instead, they retreated, they went into the Capitol themselves, they set up safe spaces for everyone in the Capitol, So they ushered them. They told them in the House of Representatives, I think it was, and the protesters were actually, they made holes in the door, in the window, like one of the rooms where they were sheltering, and they told everyone to lie down behind barriers and things so they couldn't be shot at from the window of the door that the protesters were trying to break through. Now it was one of these confrontations, I don't know which one, where the police shot a protester who was trying to come in, who might have had a gun and would have been able to shoot at the representatives or the senators, whichever it was. And in that confrontation, that's where one woman was shot in the chest area and sadly later died. And so it would have been one of the confrontations where the police were protecting sheltered people. And so that's how they did it, and that's why we have these scenes of the protesters just marching around inside the Capitol, and many of them, some of them who just went in, and then they very quickly, once they realised what was going, they went out again. So I would imagine those ones who got out pretty quickly, as soon as they saw the special police, whatever they're called, then they immediately said, "We want out of there." And one of them went out to a window, and one went out the door. That was interviewed earlier on by the on television. So those, I wouldn't think there would be much legal process against them, because they're just naive people who got caught up along. They maybe didn't even notice the Confederate flags, or even very naive people didn't even understand the significance of what was going on. So there will have been people like that who just went along with the crowd, and the crowd surged through. They were in the crowd outside the Capitol, and then it surged into the Capitol. They just went with the flow, maybe even pushed from behind, and then once they realised what was going on, they would have gone out again. And I think most Trump supporters would be like that. These are not typical supporters. The ones who went in the front, they had a clear agenda. Some of them had actually got bombs with them. And you don't go around outside the Capitol carrying bombs in your pocket. So they set some bombs inside, and then so the police then went around and they had to defuse the whole situation, get rid of these bombs that had been set by some of the protesters. And again, remember, Trump has approved all that. He has not said a word against any of this. People going into the Capitol Hill with guns and with bombs, and he hasn't said there's anything wrong with that. It's absolutely incredible. And so this, I think, will lead to really quite a lot of diminishing of Trump's influence in the Republican Party. And he might start some new far-right party or something, because it's so far-right now, if you actually do follow this, that basically he's aligned himself with the white supremacists, and most people are not going to want to go along with him in that direction, unless he makes some very clear statement to bring himself a little bit more towards the centre again. And he hasn't done that. And so whatever his personal politics and whatever his reason, maybe he's very naive himself and doesn't understand what he's done, but he's made Trumpism into quite a far-right thing by doing this, by supporting storming the Capitol Hill. I mean, very far-right. And not many of his supporters are going to be willing to go along with him in that direction. So we'll have to see where this goes. But it's certainly shrinking his base. Even if he comes back more towards the centre, after having done this, a lot of people will just say we can't follow Trumpism anymore, even though they might approve of many of his other objectives, but they just can't go along with this. So I think this is going to have the effect of maybe some of the far right splitting off from the Republican, and the Republican Party becoming more centrist again, more like it used to be. More like it was under Bush or something. So so that's it. This is Biden's response. So if you now click on the links, and what I've explained will hopefully give you a bit more understanding of the context here as to what has happened. And then maybe if you listen, then you'll better understand why Pence and Mitch McConnell and Biden said the things they actually said. So, because I get the impression that quite a few in the United States don't quite understand the scale of what has happened there. And it's a watershed moment, and you can't go back on that. And so going into the future, but the effect this has had is bringing together and made very clear how resilient the US democracy is. It was able to withstand this, and they immediately continued that very same night, and then worked overnight. They didn't leave the building until they had gone all the way through all the objections. There was a move early on to just stop all the objections to finish it quickly, but there were some senators who wanted to bring the objections, who, while talking about their objections, at the same time very carefully to distance themselves from the protests, and said they don't support protests at all, but they want to raise these objections. And so they did go through all the objections. All of them were none of them were passed, as nobody expected any of them to pass. And then they then voted, counted the votes, and the votes said, as expected, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the next president and the president-elect. So, what else have I not explained? So, it doesn't mean that the far right are going to grow in importance in the United States, because most of these protesters that were protesting outside the Capitol Hill, outside Capitol, they were just normal Trump protesters who are not far right. They are not they're not white supremacists. They follow Trump. This kind of personality thing, and then they also believe in some of the things he's trying to achieve, but they do not support this sort of thing. So remember, most Trump supporters would be as appalled by this as anyone. So please bear that in mind. This is not centralist to Trump, and then what Trump's going to do next, and whether he can still keep these people following him who would not go in that direction once they understand what has really happened. Then that's what we've got to see, what happens next. So is there anything else that I've got to talk? So that's about him being removed from office. The cabinet is meeting, and yes, that's the word, I was getting the word for it. The cabinet is going to be meeting. It's meeting to consider invoking 25th Amendment. So just a reminder, so they can stop him if they need to, and they can stop him at very fast notice. If Trump is going out of line, they can just stop it, pretty much in a few minutes really. Meet together and say, emerge the meeting and say, we have now got to do this thing we were talking about the other day, and then walk over to Congress and say, we are now starting this process. Then from that point on, then Trump just can't do any of the things. He has no more powers as a president. So, especially if there's anything to do with foreign policy, they would stop that immediately if they needed to. And indeed internal policy, indeed in the United States, if he was doing something that they regard as deeply non-constitutional, and he was going to do that in the next few days, then they can stop it immediately. So that's something to bear in mind. So it doesn't. It's not like they have to. It's not like impeachment, where he remains president all the way through impeachment, and then even a very fast impeachment takes some days. But with this 25th Amendment, then he is not president at all the moment the process starts. So that, and because it's designed to deal with the president's gone to the lally, and just has to be removed immediately. And then I was just going to say, I explained in a longer video, I probably explained it better there. Do I need to say anything about this? About how Trump does not have the nuclear, he can't press any nuclear button. So this is true for all presidents. No president is trained, well, even if a president was trained as a military officer, which they typically are not, as president they would have the separation anyway. They wouldn't want to be involved in directing the soldiers in military operations. But someone like, and I don't know if any recent, I don't know if any, probably in the 19th century, I don't think any of the recent presidents have had any military training. I'm sure there were back in the 19th century. Those of you who are very familiar with US history will probably say, why isn't he saying this? But the several names I'm sure they will probably immediately spring to mind. But the modern presidents in the United States are not military generals, and there's no way so Trump could never order he just doesn't have the training to be able to order say a fighter to go up in a fighter jet or something, or to people to launch nuclear weapons, but it is separated anyway. So the way it works is that if a president wants to do something military, he orders a 5-star general to do it. And the 5-star general then will work out a military plan, and he'll go back to the president and say, well, what you want to do, that particular thing's not possible, but there are these 3 or 4 options that are quite closely related to what you want to do. Which of these do you choose? And that's basically how it works. And then he might say, well, none of these is quite right, but this. And then so there'll be a dialogue back and forth. But the general is the one who makes the military plans. And for there to be a military plan, there has to be a military objective. And whatever method is used to achieve that objective has to be proportionate, so that especially any civilian casualties have to be proportionate to the military objective. And that would include assessing how the other person would be likely to respond to whatever you do. So for instance, there's a rumour, I don't know if it's true, maybe we won't know until they unlock all the archives, but there was a rumour that at one point when in Syria and they bombed that chemical factory, that Trump was suggested, so I don't know if this is true, so this may be completely wrong, but it could be him. It's possible someone very naive could have done this, that he was suggesting doing a broader military campaign that would have risked killing Russian soldiers. And so in that situation, the general would just say, I don't see how that is feasible without too much risk for civilian casualties, and there'd be probably many other military objections to doing that. So that would be an example. So if whether that incident actually happened or not, that would be a good example. If a president did try to do that, then the general would step in. And then what happens after that, if the president still persists, is that you then get the lawyers involved, because there is an international law of armed conduct, and the military generals have that embodied. They've been trained in this all their life, and the thing is, and so the other point is that a military officer drilled in all their life is that they are fully responsible for anything they do. So they can't use the excuse, oh, my superior told me to do this. You have to have the ethical responsibility. Under the law of armed conduct, you are fully responsible for whatever you do. That was gradually clarified. I'm not sure, if you're an expert on military law, you will know the actual time that they clarified that point, but that's the situation with present day military law. So the general is fully responsible for whatever he decides. And so it doesn't matter if the president tells him to do something, then the president is responsible as well, of course, but the general is also responsible and fully responsible. He can't hijack any of his responsibility off to the president. And so he has to evaluate from his own point of view, is this something that is it even legal, or is it a war crime basically? And if it is, he's not going to do it. And then if the president persists, then he will say, well, I need to get my employers involved, and they would be listening to this phone call all the way along. A general would not just be chatting away to a president about stuff like this without having a team of legal experts who are listening in on the call. And so if it got to the point where the president then, where the general says, well, I don't see how this fits with what my military training says is an acceptable way to respond. And indeed, I don't even see that you've got a military objective. Imagine if Trump said something like no military objective at all. Then if Trump persisted, then the general would say, well, I need to get my legal team in. And the legal team who'd been listening all along would then start talking to Trump's lawyers. And then we'd go back and forth. And then Trump would have his lawyers listening in, and I mean, assuming they even went along with all this, they might say to Trump, that's not, he's absolutely right, you can't do that. But assuming Trump's lawyers try to defend him, then they'd be talking back and forth, and then if they couldn't resolve it, then it ends up in Congress. So Congress has the final decision, not the president. Because the president, again, with the separation of powers, the president is only the executive branch. The president is executing the laws in Congress. So if it comes to a point where you can't see how it fits within the Constitution and the legal system and international laws and treaties, then it ends up in Congress. So that's how it would work. So there's no way, especially with just a few days left and Biden coming in on the 20th, there's no way that Trump is going to start any kind of military thing. Now, he hasn't actually ever been a war. He hasn't, that's one thing you can say about him. He did not start any major wars. He has never been someone who has seemed actually wanting to do that. He's made these veiled threats, but they have never amounted to anything. And I think it's been pretty clear that if push came to shove, I say, well, that's not the right word, but if it came to the line that he would not support, he would not have gone ahead and done the military actions, because it's just not. He's a businessman, and businessmen don't. And a businessman in a kind of peaceful civilian area of business, such as golf courses and hotels, and it's just not the way that those kind of businessmen think. They are not in any kind of business that would in any way benefit from a war, and in exactly the opposite. So it's constantly against anything that he would have wanted as a businessman anyway. Even just looking at his own business, never mind the ethical broader context. So he's just not the sort of, he just doesn't have the background of someone who would be likely to, in any way, be a likely person who would want to start any kind of a major war. So it's no surprise really that he kept to his pledge and commitment, and he did make this pledge, and he takes his pledges seriously, like he took the pledge of building that wall with Mexico seriously. So, and that's another thing you can say. I'm not saying Trump doesn't have good points. And for me, one of the highlights and one of the most positive things of his career was, as a president, was his way he managed the situation in North Korea, whether it was by luck or good fortune or some deep insights, whatever it was, he managed to help them along the process with his very extraordinary approach of threatening Kim Jong-un back. But it did actually work, and it ended up with there being a much more peaceful situation. He didn't sadly achieve his aim of peace, of a complete peace treaty, but he has set up a situation which could well lead to that possibility in a not so distant future, in a way that it's impossible to know what the difference would have been if Clinton had been president, because you can't run history and see. But I think there was a thawing after the Winter Olympics that was very remarkable, and I don't think we can clearly say that if we were to run history again with a different president, it's not at all clear that whether it was just chance or whether it was some other reason, then it's not clear it would happen again. So that's one of a few positive things. So to say something positive, so I personally, I would never support Trump, but I can recognise positive things in someone, and so that is something positive in Trump. And so so anyway, I thought I'd end with something positive because I've been saying lots of negative things. And so his legacy won't all be all negative. There's also positive things come from his legacy. But what a way to end your presidency. And I think, it's not a good look at all. I think he's probably also scuppered any chance of becoming president again in 2024. I'd be very surprised after this. But anyway, we'll see what happens. And so, yeah, so that's all I wanted to say. But there's not. So the main so just to summarise, the main points here is that it's over. Sadly, 4 people died. It's a shocking moment in American history, but it showed the strength of the US Constitution, the strength of democracy in the United States. It's actually likely to be a diminishing of Trump's power after Joe Biden is elected, compared to what it would have been if he hadn't done this, because it just was so extreme, and very few people are going to go along with that and are going to look back at this after Joe Biden is president and say that they want to associate with the man who did this. And so it's actually going to be quite a weakening of his effect on US politics. Whether he may well still have a very strong effect, because he still has these supporters, but he's not going to be able to tweet the things he used to tweet, because it's against the terms of service of Twitter. And once he's no longer president, he loses that immunity, because he's no longer leader he's no longer world leader. And it doesn't apply to ex-presidents, only to presidents who are actually in duty doing their job. Their exemption, this private company's exemption for tweets by world leaders. So, and of course his tweets are not going to have the effect that they have now, because there's nothing you can actually do to change any foreign policy once he's no longer president. So they'll be much less impactful, and probably we'll get much less on the news in the United Kingdom since then, once Joe Biden is president. And I will have a big sigh of relief as a debunker, because I would say about half of I don't want to say a percentage, but so many of the things that have scared people for the last 4 years have been due to things that Trump has done, because he's been such an erratic president. And I've been trying to, and even like I said, the thing that I've just praised him for, I thought he did was good, the way he did with Kim Jong-un, but the way he did it was very scary for people who are not, who don't have the kind of confidence and that he had, that it was going to work. And so I was constantly reassuring people and saying, no, Trump can't do a nuclear attack of North Korea. It was absolutely certain he couldn't do that, and that North Korea is not going to start a nuclear war. There was no possibility of an exchange. It was just them, like rotting stags, sort of locking horns. That was absolutely clear all along, but trying to reassure these scared people that this was impossible, and these were just fighting words, and there was just no way they could actually do what they're threatening to do. That was quite difficult at the time, and lots of people did get very scared. And so, anyway, there will be quite a dropping. There will be at least that aspect of it. That and then I don't want to talk about all the things that are good about Biden, because that's not what this is about. I've talked about that before. I'm keeping this very carefully. I'm just going to say things that are positive about Trump, about his legacy, if I talk about anything else about this thing, about the Capitol. So I think I'll stop here, and I'll upload it, and hopefully this will help some of you. So if any of you want to, just a shout out for our group Doomsday Debunked, and if you're good at fact checking, if you want to help scared people. And of course, it's really quite overwhelmed there just now. We're doing our best to keep going, and I'm focusing on writing these debunks and doing these videos, because I think this may be the best way that I can help the scared people there, just by making things really, really clear as best I can. So I'm just going to upload this now, and sorry for all of you there, the ones who have tweets or PMs that I haven't been able to answer yet today. I'm going to do the best I can, and I am running behind quite a lot at the moment, sadly, because we've had so much so quickly. We had the United Kingdom going into lockdown, and we have this new variant which is scaring people, and then we have the what just happened on the Capitol Hill, and then the usual bunch of false prophets and people saying extraordinary things about asteroids that are totally untrue, and so on. With asteroids, the very bizarre thing, there's a claim that an asteroid is totally harmless in the asteroid belt orbiting between Mars and Jupiter in the main asteroid belt. You just pick up a random asteroid and they say this is going to hit Earth. There's no possibility. So we have to deal with that all the time as well. Anyway, so, but yeah, I'll upload now. I tend to go on too long. I'll just stop this. I'm trying to get a bit short.